So, this was one of those movies that I do feel like, by me not having much previous knowledge about this character and his story, that it did kind of work to my detriment when it came to my overall understanding of everything that happened in this movie. Now, besides that, going into the actual movie, I didn't really know what to expect, right? Because on the one hand, it was panned by critics, but then when it actually came out, the general public seemed to love it, or at the very least, the consensus seemed to be that the movie wasn't as bad as critics were saying. So I really didn't know how to take this movie, because on certain occasions, I do tend to side with the critics, but then also on other occasions, I do tend to side with the public. Now, after seeing this, I do have to say that I'm siding with the public on this one. Venom really wasn't that bad. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? This was not a flawless movie by any means, but I enjoyed it. I was entertained. I wasn't falling asleep. I was pretty into this movie. But like I said, even though this isn't the best movie that I've ever seen, it definitely exceeded any kind of expectations that I did have going into the movie. So, Venom stars Tom Hardy, Michelle Williams, Riz Ahmed, Jenny Slate, and a bunch of other people. And so Eddie Brock, played by Tom Hardy, is an investigative reporter who, after getting fired from his job, ends up acquiring this symbiote named Venom, who has come to his world with sinister plans, but after having been connected to Eddie Brock for some time, he has a change of heart and instead works with Eddie to try and save the world. So right off the bat, one of the things that I can say that I definitely enjoyed about this movie was the relationship dynamic between Tom Hardy's character Eddie Brock and Venom. I thought that their buddy, but also like butting heads kind of relationship really worked for the movie, and I think that that's one of the things that really sold me on this movie. And I also think that Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock did a pretty good job in the role. But that was no real surprise, because I know that Tom Hardy is another really good chameleon-like actor. So, if anything, if the movie itself was horrible, I knew that at the very least, Tom Hardy would be some kind of ray of sunshine for the movie. I do feel like seeing him in this particular role, as compared to some of the other roles, some of the more serious and meaty roles that I've seen him in, was a kind of breath of fresh air. Now, with that being said, in terms of the Venom character, this is where I feel like my lack of knowledge, like I said, worked to my detriment. And I say that because I've come to the understanding after seeing the movie that Venom does have a comedic side to him. But for me, and maybe this is just where my own kind of personal preferences arise, I felt like a lot of his dialogue was just too cheesy. And I understand that in the comics that was, one of the traits of his character. But for me, seeing this, this really dark and disturbing looking and villainous character say some of these really cheesy lines that I feel like are pretty basic, it just didn't work for me. But if that is what his character is known for, right, if that is what he was kind of built on, then I guess it is what it is. But like I said, it's not something for me that, that I particularly like. Though there were some times where, it was humorous, overall, I wasn't a fan of his dialogue. And I do think that that gives way to a much larger gripe that I had with the movie, which is just the overall writing. The writing in this movie was just bad. So for one, I found the exposition of the movie to be rushed. For the first 15 or 20 minutes of the movie, I felt like we didn't really get to be grounded in especially the characters as much as I feel like we should have. And so because of that, I found a lot of their motivations to be muddled. Like, for example, Eddie Brock as this investigative reporter, I felt like we should have learned more about who he is as an investigative reporter. You know, why is it that he's an investigative reporter? What is it that makes him do what it is that he does? And maybe they do put this in there at some point and I just missed it. But even if that is the case, I think the fact that I may have missed it means that they didn't really do enough to really solidify him in that career field. And then when it came to the villain of the story, I found myself wanting to understand why it is that he's doing all of this stuff. And we do find out about it fairly early on in the movie, but we don't find out about it through him. We find out about it through a colleague that's just running through all of it as she's telling Eddie Brock everything that's going on. And to me, I felt like that was a bit lazy. You know, that was the movie telling us instead of showing us these things. Now, when it comes to the villain, though, I do think that Riz Ahmed does a really good job playing this villainous character, especially with that one monologue where, you know, he's talking to one of the volunteers. I found that to be really good, but overall, you know, he's just a regular villain to me that, you know, it's just is mediocre, I guess I could say. Like, there was nothing extremely amazing about this character outside of the actor that played him. I also found that moment where Venom himself turns into this kind of hero and him wanting to work with Eddie Brock to be a bit confusing. Because, and I feel like this then gets back to my lack of knowledge about this Venom character, I'm going into this movie expecting a villain, right? But then he turns into this anti-hero like a little more than halfway through, and I'm like, wait a minute, what is this? And granted, they do, you know, throw in like a couple of lines where he explains why it is that he's had this change of heart, but again, it felt really lazy. It's like you could tell that they threw that in there because they knew that they needed something in there so that you're not confused, but I feel like they should have taken it a bit further than just that. And then I also found the whole like side story slash adventure of the other bigger, more stronger Venom character to be really unnecessary. Like, I didn't really understand why it was in there in the first place. And then the fact that they didn't even show it go into the little girl, I was like, why did y'all choose to leave that out? I also found the final fight scene to be incredibly underwhelming, which was really sad. And then, I mean, the fact that you have these two Venom characters that basically look the same and that are really dark and then that are also fighting in this really dark environment just didn't help. Like, that final fight scene really should have been done a lot better. But with all of that being said, like I said in the beginning, I still pretty much enjoyed this movie. I think, you know, it is a fun experience to say the least. I did find some of the fight scenes to be pretty entertaining and the special effects to be fairly good, especially, you know, seeing him turn into the Venom character. And the fact that, you know, Sony didn't wait until, you know, the end of the movie or anything like that to, you know, introduce the Venom character, I thought was really good, because I know that that was one of the biggest worries that a lot of people had about this movie initially, like before it even came out. You know, they were worried if we were even going to get much of the Venom character, and so we did, so that's a good thing. But like I said, I definitely don't think that this is the worst movie that I've ever seen. You know, I've definitely seen a lot worse. Does this mean that Sony needs to continue doing superhero movies and all that kind of stuff? Not really, you know, but you know, Sony didn't completely fumble the bag when it came to Venom. Yes, it could have been way better and it should have been way better, but I'm okay with it.